So today is with a little bit of sorrow, actually, that we're going to end this book that I really enjoyed, really enjoyed presenting. I didn't realize is what today is the last three lessons of the book.
Yeah.
They do have something in common as usual. And I think they are very nice and very appropriate for us where we stand today as spiritists, and for this moment that we are facing in this accelerated transformation of this planet. Soraya, are you okay to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we begin. 48, the common good. In the midst of a crystal clear night, the disciples were gathered in Peter's house, discussing the difficulties involved in spreading redemptive ideas. A lot of people were taking advantage of Jesus' help, seeking personal gain. One particular merchant was encouraging people to assemble in a certain area of the shore in order to increase the sale of his wines. Common wagon drivers were intensifying the advertising of the heavenly kingdom in the surrounding areas, not with the goal of growing spiritually, but in order to rent various vehicles to visiting patients who were seeking the Master's aid. The opinion of nearly all of the apostles were one of alarm and discouragement. That was when the divine friend began to speak. There was once a philosopher who immersed himself in the studies of the divine revelation. He had a disciple who was never happy with people's incomprehension with regards to the heavenly truths. He was always getting angry at the evildoers, the ingrates, or the hypocrites who were misusing his elevated teachings. His master listened to him in silence until one fine morning there was a sudden summer downfall. The master invited him to go on shore, stroll to the neighboring field after the countryside had recovered from the rain. They hadn't even walked half a mile while they caught sight of a wide strip of swampland, and noticing that the choir mile was receiving the rainwater, the teacher explained. Thus, the mud hole receives the heavenly liquid and turns it into a dirty broth. But there are frogs and toads that will safely and effectively benefit from it. If it didn't rain, these dark waters will probably become toxic. After a few more steps, they found full puddles in the recesses of hardened earth. The teacher studied them and added, "Here the gusting fount from the sky is now unpleasant mud. But what would become of this sterile ground if the divine water didn't visit it? Tomorrow we might see in this soil a flowering display of fragrant wild lilies." They proceeded further and stopped to examine some bare trees. The water on the dried out branches appeared to be gray and fetid, but the teacher explained. The blessing of the crystal rain came down heavily, and solemnly on these forsaken trees. For what would happen to them if the gifts from heaven didn't benefit them at all? Perhaps in no time at all they would die down to their roots. A few weeks from now, however, they will be covered with lush branches acting as blessed homes for the birds. They continued on and came up upon some peach trees whose blossoms held the drops from the sky with such beauty that within them they looked more like diamond like dew, slightly iridescent in the bright sunlight. The master pointed at them and said, "Here the pure petals have retained the heavenly gift with absolute faithfulness, and soon they will become fragrant and beautiful with excellent fruit for the banquet of life." Immediately afterwards, casting his eyes over the extensive landscape, he said to the amazed disciple, "Never criticize the fountainhead of heavenly aid. Each person receives a measure of it on the plane on which they live. In harboring its sublime principles, the criminal becomes less cruel, the worse appears less bad, the imperfect improves, the unfortunate person finds relief, and the good ones improve to better carry out the service of our Father. If you possess enough understanding to discern reality, don't waste your time on empty rebuke. Learn from the Supreme Lord, who constantly helps in accordance with each person's spiritual standing and need. Distribute to all those around you the gifts of heaven that you have already faithfully retained. In heaven, open up endless treasures to you. Having finished the story, Jesus felt silent, as if they had received a sublime lesson in such few words. The disciples, silent and happy, looked at one another expressively. Then the Lord blessed them and left for the banks of the lake, gazing pensively at the stars glimmering in the distance.
Thank you.
Welcome.
The common good. The title is already very explaining of the whole parable of Jesus here. And the topic of discussion, as I always like to mention in the beginning, is the difficulties involved in spreading the redemptive ideas. How hard it is to spread the gospel. How hard it is at sometimes to pass along the things you have learned. But when we speak of the redemptive ideas, when we speak of the gospel, we are speaking of the common good. It's common to everyone in every circumstances. And I think that is pretty much the message. The title is indeed the message of the whole lesson. When you consider the idea of passing something along, we need to consider three things, right? The thing in itself, the message, and there is a sender, someone trying to spread, and there is also the receiver, the one to whom the sender intent or is trying to reach. So there is three things here, right? The message itself, in this case, you're gonna say, I'm gonna use the gospel just because it's easier. Okay. And the gospel is a common good. It is good in itself, it's absolute in itself. There is no quantifying or qualifying. It is the absolute good in itself, the gospel. And there are the sender, the one who's trying to spread the idea, the one who plays the role of active role, and there is the receiver, the one that we try to, the sender is trying to reach, who would be, at least in the beginning, the passive one, the one that to receive. And there is difficulties on both sides, right? Well, there are difficulties in both sides. For the sender, perhaps it's a little more challenging because the sender has the work to do, is the active one. The sender needs to receive, reason on the message, understand the message, and upon understanding the message, it has to give it a value and has to be enough of a value to want to share it. If I receive, and we are receiving, we're being bombarded with things these days, right? I don't use the media in general, but and I am bombarded with receiving stuff. I can imagine those people who is deeply involved with the media. And we have to be selective. we have to understand what's while receiving, we have to understand the value of what we're receiving, if it's valuable enough to share, and to be wise enough to discard what's not good enough for ourselves. If it's not good enough to ourselves, naturally it should not be good enough to others as well. It is a time that we have to be very selective and careful as the sender. Perhaps you don't have much control as the receiver. You're receiving a bunch of things, but then we have to be very selective. The sender needs to be confident. They have to have some self-esteem. In order to get ready to share, the sender must be free of expectations, to expect a return for the work done, to expect a reward for the work done. You should not expect to see immediate effect upon others. If anything else, the sender, and here I'm talking about the gospel, should even expect the contrary, should expect some rejection, some sarcasm, some deaf ears, part of the process that the sender must go through. And one thing that the sender must always keep in mind, that the sender, the one now trying to spread the good news, was once the receiver. And quite often, it goes in that transition of being the receiver and already initiating, being proactive, in being also a sender, passing along what it's receiving. And that work requires faith in ourselves, in the value of the message, and requires hope that it will make a difference, that will take an effect, even if we are not able to see it. And keeping in mind that we were also the receiver as well, and continue to be the receiver, that you need to apply upon others the same patience that we received and you continue to receive. And with hope and with faith, allow time to do its magic, to make its work that time always does upon the receivers. If you find deaf ears today, it'll be temporary. But the message is always good because it's a common good. And in this passage, this parable that Jesus uses over here, using this philosopher and the disciple, Jesus addresses both the sender and the receiver. The more proactive or the enlightened one was the philosopher, who was passing upon his enlightenment, and both the common population, general population, and his disciple were the receiver. The receiver, the disciple, of course, was not getting the whole message. The way he addresses the general population showed that he was a little bit lost, not understand the whole thing, because the disciple were never happy, or just to be never happy with people's incomprehension to regard to the heaven truth shows that he was missing some important aspects of the message in itself. And that's what the philosopher would address, use the analogy of the rain. And he was always getting angry at evildoers, the ingrates and hypocrites were misusing the elevated teachings. The philosopher or this disciple, the disciple of this philosopher was expressing exactly the thought of the disciples who were seeing that the messages of Jesus was being taken for granted and misused, people trying to use it for personal gain, which is not different today. You have the messages of the gospel over here, building fortunes, building temples with walls of gold, with a heliport on top of those temples. So the message of the gospel not even mix themselves with the population anymore, but he arrives to his temple on his own helicopter. Each one may think it for himself, or does it make? What's the relationship with that, with the teachings of Jesus? Happened then, it's happening today. You continue to help for as long as we do not educate ourselves to his true messages. But it's interesting that the philosopher uses a downpour, a rain, to explain to his disciple the value of this common good. There was a big rain, and after the rain, he took the disciple for a walk, and goes to this walk, following a path that is by design, going from the lowest to the highest, going to the lowest land to the highest, going from start with the swamp, the quagmire, the lowland. And there he noticed that when the rain comes, it immediately creates a little bit more of a mass of the swamp. But the rain is absolutely necessary because it will remove the toxic substances that would concentrate and accumulate and would not allow the frogs and toads to survive. So in the swamp again, the rain removes all the toxic substances and allow life to continue in that swamp. He continues walking, he goes into an area of dry land, or there used to be a dry land before the downpour. And immediately the dry land becomes with little pods of mud. But the dry land is transformed in somewhat sterile land, in a land that we now will be able to have wild flowers, wild lilies to grow on it. So it's moving up step by step. And after that, he sees an area with some large trees. And the large trees already shows that it's has some kind of strength, has some kind of power, has some kind of depth in the root that allows it to become a big, strong tree, but it's still very much dependent on the rain, because if it doesn't rain for quite some time, those roots does not have enough depth to seek water for itself, and and the trees will die. And continue the path, walking. Now he comes to a area of fruit trees, specifically peach trees. And there he says that here the pure petals have retained the heavenly gift of absolute faithfulness, and soon will become fragrant and beautiful with excellent fruit for the banquet of life. So now here, the fruit tree has the depth, has the foundation strong enough, so much so that it's able to produce the flowers, but it still requires the assistance of the rain to transform that rain into fruits that will serve for the whole population. It's important to note that the tree that offers the fruit, that has already a strong foundation, that has already strong roots, that is able to flower, is still not so self self-sufficient. It still requires the rain. But upon receiving the rain, it retains it and transforms it into fruits that it shares to all. And more important here, and I think the value here, is that the tree does not choose the receiver. The tree is not really concerned on who is picking up the fruits. It's not concerned on what they are doing with the fruit that they pick. They receive, they transform it into fruit, and they pass it along. And then Jesus finalizes, making the same analogy, that the gospel is good, that the message is good, and is good for everyone in accordance to their capability and to receive and to their needs. The same way that the swamp needs the water to not become absolutely toxic and kill everything, upon receiving the messages of the gospel, the criminal becomes less cruel. It doesn't stop being a criminal. The swamp doesn't stop being a swamp, but it becomes less toxic. The criminal becomes less cruel. The dry land transformed itself a little bit. It's now able to produce wildflowers, which is good. It's not good as a fruit, but it's good. So the worse appears less bad. The trees that are already strong enough to become trees with some foundation already continues in that process of improving. The imperfect improves. And those who had already gained strong foundation, perhaps the disciples that Jesus was talking with directly, perhaps us, have a very solid foundation already. We are producing flowers, but we still need the rain to transform the flowers into fruit and to pass it along. That's why you always say it's like this book, which is a book somewhat intended for children, for adolescents, but it is profound enough for everyone. I hear spiritist speakers using those lessons they receive here very often in the teachings to adults. Because the 5 years old will read these things and will extract what a 5 years old can. The 10 years old, we should be able to extract a little bit more. The 15 years old should be able to extract what the 5 did, what the 10 did, and now is able to extract a little bit more. We adults, we who had already a minimum accept and understand the value of this doctrine, should be able to extract a little bit more than the 15 years old. And in the same way, the same rain that falls, and it's good for the swamp, whatever the swamp needs, and it rains upon the peach tree, each one will transform that water in accordance to its needs and capability. Therefore is the common good. The gospel is a common good for all of us, and all of us will receive it in accordance to our abilities and to our needs. Therefore, when we go around and transform ourselves from just plain passive receiver and becomes a proactive sender, make sure that we distribute to all those around you the gifts of heaven that you have already faithfully retained, and heaven will open up endless treasures to you, because it is in giving that we receive. And do not be concerned, like the peach tree is not concerned of who is picking up those gifts from heaven and what are they doing with it. They'll do what they are able to do with it. Each one of us stand at one patamar of progress, more than intellectual, and each one of us will utilize in accordance to what we need at that moment and what we are able to do in that moment. Keep in mind that you can always go one step ahead, that you can always transform the swamp in something like a dry land, and the dry land that produces wildflower can transform itself in the area that produces fruit trees that already has the purity to receive that rain and transform it into fruits. I think is a very applicable lesson for us today, the time that we witness. So things are not really agreeable with the gospel, and perhaps we feel a little, or extract, I do, kind of disappointed, and then sometimes even hopeless. But to keep this message in mind, each one is receiving, regardless of whatever one is doing today. The criminal becomes less criminal. The criminal becomes less cruel, I'm sorry. And eventually, as the law applies for each one, if you don't use it, you lose it. Eventually, the criminal stop being a criminal, stop being cruel. Because the message is always good, is always taking effect. Sometimes we don't see it. Sometimes it's very hard for us to see the effect, but you keep on doing our best. Comments, questions?
Um, it reminded me of something I learned a very long time ago with Sara's mentor in Brazil when I was not a spiritist yet. There was this guy that used to attend the center there, and on his personal life, he was really taking advantage of people and not making good choices with his life. And I remember someone talking to her and saying, "Wow, but he's a spiritist. How can he do all these things?" And her answer was, "Imagine if he wasn't."
Yep.
You know, we it benefits. It may not show, but the message benefits in different amounts. I think this is a beautiful lesson. I really liked it.
Yeah, I really like this lesson too, and it is so useful for us at this moment in our lives. And I like the way the disciple builds up, or Jesus builds up, from going from the lowest to the highest. So there is a progress, and it's good. It's common good for everyone at any part of where we find ourselves, and others find themselves. Oh, okay. Any more comments? Any more questions? Okay, so the next two also follow pretty much, because I think, I don't know if I am building this kind of understanding, but I think all the three lessons that we read have something in common, and I think this has, and the next one as well, something in common as well, the redemptive journey.
Okay. Number 49, the redemptive journey. Initiating that evening's enjoyable gospel-centered conversation, Zebedee's wife reverently asked Jesus, "Lord, how will our journey to the divine kingdom happen?" Christ appeared to concentrate for a few moments and explained, "In a valley in a far-off country, there were a number of Jews who were blind from birth, accustomed to darkness and poverty. They had lived for many years in their cave. When an enlightened brother of their race came along and told them about the profound beauty of Mount Zion in Jerusalem, where the chosen people worshipped the Supreme Father. After listening to his story, all the blind people were greatly upset and lamented their impossible situation. Their seer friend, however, explained to them that their situation was not hopeless. If they had the courage to apply themselves to certain disciplines, and if they abstained from the various lower nature pleasures to which they had grown accustomed in darkness, they would be able to regain contact with the light and go to the holy city. Most of his listeners viewed his suggestions with obvious sarcasm, asserting that their parents and other ancestors had been blind and that it was impossible for them to regain the use of their eyes. One of them, however, a brave and serene young man, believed in the recommended method and put it to use. He began devoting himself to the required disciplines, and after 4 years of meditation, hard work, and personal obedience to the law, along with fasting and prayer, he received his sight. He almost went out of his mind with joy. In an ecstasy, he told his companions about the sublimity of experience, commenting on the spaciousness of the sky and the beauty of the nearby trees, but no one believed him. Even though everyone thought he was crazy, the young man didn't get discouraged. He was now able to make out the path, and he would be able to progress on his way. He left the deep valley, but without any notion of direction. He wandered around for days and nights in a troubled state, set upon by great numbers of wolves and vipers. He saw how inexperienced he was, so he exercised the greatest caution until one morning, in order to gather wild honey, he approached a hiding place carved out in the rock and was held up by a thief who demanded him to hand over his money bag. But since he had no money, he agreed to be enslaved by the malefactor, who for 5 long years kept him in incessant work. However, he acted with such kindness and demonstrated so much selflessness that his persecutor changed and became mellower. Converting to the good, he gave him back his freedom. Free once again, the faithful believer started out once more because the desire to reach the divine temple filled his mind. He started out distributing fraternity and happiness to all travelers who crossed his path, but upon reaching a small village where the law was enforced with excessive severity, he was arrested as an unknown criminal. Knowing that he would be betrayed by the lack of strength, if he tried to escape, he let them lock him up until the problem could be resolved, which in fact took a long time. Nonetheless, he was never inactive in exercising the good. In the very jail that he had wounded his innocence, he found numerous opportunities to demonstrate goodwill, love, and tolerance. The authorities were really impressed and finally set him free. The desire to reach the sublime sanctuary absorbed his thoughts, and he continued on his way. But only after 20 years of struggle and trial, over which he was always victorious, was he able to reach Mount Zion in order to worship the Supreme Lord. The Master paused, gazed around the silent room, and concluded, "Such is the journey to the heavenly kingdom." Above all, people must realize that they are blind and apply to themselves the remedy prescribed in the divine commandments. Upon attaining understanding, despite the ridicule of all the ignorant people around them, they must press onward alone, almost always alone, from the dark terrestrial valley to the mount of divine light, making use of every opportunity to serve indiscriminately even their enemies and persecutors. When followers of the good understand their duty to silently mobilize all of their resources on the journey without wasting any time on complaining or criticizing, which only indicate a low level of spiritual growth, will they then be in a position to reach the kingdom in the shortest amount of time possible, because they will continue molding their wings for the divine flight by using self-discipline, unceasing work for the peace and happiness of all.
Thank you. So the redemptive journey, and again, the topic of discussion over here is how will our journey to the divine kingdom happen? And I think we can take off the future and put over here, how is our journey to the divine kingdom? Because we are already walking that path. We are on that path. We are, to the best of our abilities, of course, moving towards that divine kingdom that awaits us, that we are building for ourselves, inside of ourselves. And I think it's a common question. I think all the questions presented in this book are common questions for us who are in this path. What is ahead for us from now on? And Christ uses again another parable, and he starts by describing a group of individuals living in a valley. A valley is significant because a valley is an area that is is limited, that offers limited vision. You're somewhat surrounded by mountains, or like it's deep inside of something, right? You're surrounded by mountains. So you don't have that clear view of the horizons. Not like someone who lives by the coast, who lives by the ocean, and then have uh, that view of the infinite around you. So it's already an important point. Our vision is already limited just by living in a valley. And even worse over here, those individuals were blind. But as Jesus always used in this book, he doesn't take the exceptions. It doesn't take the hardcore wrongdoers. It takes the average dudes. And over here, it says here there are a number of Jews. So it's the people who had the commandments. These are people who had already, except or minimum, understand the one and only God, if they were Jews, of course, right? They had already received the commandments of the prophets, of Moses. So this is not a selective people individually considered to be bad people, wrongdoers, average dudes, just like the ones that Jesus was speaking to them. But they were blind from birth. And the truth that we are all blind from birth. The Spirit's book tells us that God created us simple and ignorant, without any knowledge, without any understanding. So we need to open our eyes, because that's how we are created, with the potential of rich light through our own work, through our own hard work. Well, the problems that we get used to things, right? So they are already accustomed to darkness and poverty. It's like, that's what I live. It's okay. It reminds me a lot of Plato's cave. It reminds a lot the tale of the small red fish that Emmanuel tells in the preface of which book it is, Ron? I think is
Liberation.
no, it's not maybe Liberation, yeah, one of the books. But the little red fish who lived in that pond surrounded by bigger fishes, and they were so accustomed to live in that limited environment. And until one had the courage to escape to the narrow path, just like the Plato's caves as well. I think this message reminds me a lot of that red fish and also Plato's cave. So they live there, comfortable in their misery. And that's a problem. You should never be comfortable in misery. Like, you should never be comfortable in darkness and poverty. You should always strive to improve, because there is always room for improvement. And when we become way too comfortable, divine providence find a ways to sound an alarm, to offer something to serve as a motivator, to serve as a catalyst of progress. Always. Sometimes it's a war, unfortunately. Sometimes it's a pandemic. Sometimes it's something nice. But divine providence always managed to try to take us out of that comfort, right, in darkness and poverty. And in this case, in this parable, someone wise came through and sounded an alarm and told them that about the profound beauty of the Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And immediately that sounds like not mean, not good, actually pretty mean, right? To go to the blind and tell of the beauties that that is there for people to see. But come on, I'm blind and you tell me about the beauties of this and that. For the blind man, it doesn't sound very compassionate. It's like pouring vinegar in the wound already, right? But again, divine providence finds a way to motivate us the way that we need, the way that we can take. And of course, we do what, in accordance to our free will, what we want with those alarms that comes to us. Some people have pain and stay with pain without doing anything about it, going to the doctor, seeking help until things get really bad. The blind needs to be somewhat proactive, right? For once, it needs to want to see. That's why Jesus asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do?" Right? Well, the guy is blind. Why are you asking the blind guy what he wants? Because unfortunately, there's a lot of blinds who doesn't want to see, which is the worst of the blind. Some becomes way too accustomed to their darkness and poverty and doesn't have the stamina to try to do something about. And very often because that requires discipline, it requires motivation to move from darkness to light. It requires faith in oneself, faith in the proposition brought by this friend, the seer friend, right? That if you apply yourself, I'm going to give you a set of guidelines that if you follow those guidelines, you'll be able to enjoy the beauty of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. You would have to worship the Supreme Father and naturally follow the recommendations of the Supreme Father. But as usually it happens, most of the listeners just neglected. Again, they were too accustomed to darkness and poverty. And they viewed that suggestion with obvious sarcasm. Or certainly the parents and old ancestors had also been blind and that it was impossible for them to regain the use of their eyes. At the moment that you accept the word impossible, things becomes very difficult. Once we accept that it's impossible for us to get better, things become very difficult. We see that in our leadership meetings when we speak with some spirits who come with rebellions or beings for such a long time in darkness, they say we are different. You belong to this group, I belong to this, as if there is two sets of spirits. And they say it's impossible. We don't mix. To break them out of this word impossible, it says, no, it's possible. There is just one side, there is no two sides. It's very difficult. And unfortunately, most of us are still too comfortable with our darkness and use the word impossible and skills to not work hard. But one of them was a little bit different. One of them, however, was a brave and serene young man, believed in the recommended method and put it to use. Believes not enough. A lot of people believe, but the important thing is to put to use, to apply what we believe, to transform the belief into actions. And this one young man had decided to do that. So, being blind, he understood he needed guidance. Guidance was provided. Needed discipline. Needed vigilance. The blind needs to be very vigilant where you step in, the noises around, the smell around. Has to be extra vigilant, not having the eyesight. And number one, most important, have the true desire and faith to see. Again, Bartimaeus, Jesus asked, what do you want me to do? I want to see. He had the desire of the want, like this one man, a young man, and had the faith. So much so that when Jesus performed the healing of that man and restored his vision, Jesus did not say, oh, I healed you. Jesus said, your faith has healed you. And this young man applied exactly those things, the guideline, the discipline, was vigilant. The discipline is extremely important, having faith that because you believe doesn't mean that things gonna be easy and beautiful around you. Absolutely not. He found a lot of challenges along the way. Become enslaved because he didn't have nothing that the other wants, but he offered work, labor, doing good, and doing good to oneself, doing good to others, so much so that the thief went from being a wrongdoer to receive so much compassion and understand from that one who was his slave that time that he set him free. And he continued his path, facing challenge after challenge after challenge. He left the deep valley. That's another thing that is important in this message over here. Come a times in our life that even with all the love that we have, we must leave behind those who do not want to walk with us towards the light. We need to leave the deep valley when we do not belong there anymore. Those who do not want to follow us towards the light, we eventually do. We cannot force anything upon anyone. The young man tried to motivate others, try to encourage others. No one wants to follow. He left on his own. Come a times in our life that we need to do the same thing. And he left. But of course, it's the first time he got out of that valley again, in a place where he's surrounded by mountains and does not have a big vision of the horizon yet. So it's a little bit lost. Without notion of direction, understandable. But with courage and with faith and with discipline and with vigilance, just facing trouble after trouble, but overcoming trouble after trouble after trouble. Until eventually, we don't need to go through all the challenges that he faced here. Although each one of the challenges has a message in itself, he persisted, and it took 20 years. Of course, it is a parable. Of course, this is a analogy of our spiritual growth from blind to reach that kingdom. But if I put at that time, the time of Jesus, 20 years is a long time. And it says only after 20 years, right? In the chronological physical age, over here, 20 years, it's a pretty good amount of time. He endured all the challenges along the way, but he reached that using discipline, using the guidance provided to him. He was able to reach that area. And then just conclude. We need to realize that we are blind. And being blind, we need to apply to ourselves the remedy described in the divine commandments. That upon attaining and understanding, despite the ridicule of all the ignorant people around us, we must press on, even alone if necessary. And very often, there will not be a lot who wants to follow us, even loved ones. Don't stop being loved ones because they don't want to follow. Doesn't stop loving us because they don't want to follow, and you don't stop loving them because they don't want to come along with us. From the dark terrestrial valley to the mount of divine light, we make use of every opportunity to serve indiscriminately, even their enemies and persecutors. Just like the peach tree that does not choose who is going to pick the peach and what they're going to do with the peach. The tree just offers its fruit. So we should make every opportunity to serve indiscriminately, even the enemies and persecutors. And each one will use it in accordance to the needs and capabilities. You want the criminal will become less cruel. The swamp water become less toxic. When followers of the good understand the duty to silently mobilize all their resources on the journey without wasting time on complaining, criticizing. The complaining, criticize declares that you are not really getting the message, or we are getting just partially the message. But we are on the way. See, which only indicates low level of spiritual growth. And using self-discipline and assessing work for the peace and happiness to all. That is not the end of the journey, but the goal of the journey, because the journey continues. We will eventually find for ourselves that state of peace, and the peace with our own conscience, regardless of what's happening around us in our household, throughout this world, the wars and the challenges that we face now. That peace with our own conscience, because we are using self-discipline and applying the guidelines offered to us. And you continue to work for happiness to all that will happen when all reach that peace with their own consciences, in their own conscience as well. Think again, connected messages, and very appropriate for the days that we are living today. Comments, questions? All right. So the very last one, and I think I didn't mark anything, I didn't highlight anything because it's up right here. And it's such a beautiful prayer that, or you highlight everything, or you don't highlight anything. I mean, made one highlight there here. But it's, let's read it first.
Okay. In prayer. On the eve of the Lord's departure for Sidon, the gospel service at Peter's house had taken on an air of understandable melancholy. The edifying study would proceed, but the work of revelation, in some way or another, would experience a natural interruption. With obvious emotion, Matthew read the moving pages from Isaiah, but on the night of farewells, no one had any questions. A look of untranslatable expectation appeared on everyone's faces. The master, on his part, refrained from making any comments, but at the end of the meeting, he raised his lucid eyes to heaven and prayed fervently. Father, kindle your divine light around all those who have neglected your blessing in the darkness of earthly journey. Help those who have forgotten to share the leftover bread on their full tables. Help those who are unashamed to flaunt their happiness in the face of poverty and misfortune. Help those who forget to thank their benefactors. Take pity on those who sleep in the nightmares of vice, bequeathing a glorious inheritance to those who are embarking upon the human journey. Uplift those who have forgotten the duty to serve their neighbor. Take pity on the wise that hide their intelligence within the four walls of their domestic paradise. Awaken those who dream of controlling the world, not realizing that, compared with eternity, their life in the flesh is merely 1 minute between the cradle and the grave. Uplift those who have fallen, defeated by an excess of material comfort. Correct those who spread sadness and pessimism amongst their fellow beings. Forgive those who have turned down the opportunity for peace and who go through life disseminating rebelliousness and disorder. Intervene on behalf of all those who believe that they possess fantastic power and insanely deem themselves to be judges, condemning their very own brothers and sisters. Awaken the troubled souls who poison the path of others with the spiritual aggression of untimely acts. Extend your paternal hands to all those who have forgotten about the sentence of death, the renewer of life, which your law has engraved on the precarious body. Enlighten those who have lost themselves in the darkness of hatred and revenge, of werewolf, ambition, and cold cruelty, and who believe they go through powerful and free, when they are nothing more than slaves worthy of compassion before your sublime will. All of them, Father, are wrongdoers who elude the courts of earth, but who are singled out by your sovereign and perfect justice for crimes of forgetfulness before the infinite good. At this point, he ended his remarkable prayer. Nearly all those present, including the master himself, displayed eyes wet with tears, and up above, the radiant moon in its divine fullness shone its beams down on Simon's humble home, appearing to silently weep because so many could live their lives forgetting about the Supreme Lord. But even so, the loving and righteous Father of infinite goodness and perfect justice will continue to watch over them.
The end.
Yeah.
That's an absolutely beautiful prayer. That's not expect anything else, right? And it happens in the evening prior to the departure of Jesus to Sidon. I took a look of just out of curiosity, when I was this trip to Sidon. And it said that Jesus decided to make it the trip. It was a time there where he was in Galilee of tremendous religious hostility from the Jewish leaders. There was tremendous amount of bombardment against him, against his teachings. Perhaps they were feeling threatened. The authority was being threatened by Jesus, which Jesus did never threaten them, but they felt threatened, of course. But there was tremendous amount of hostility, and Jesus needed to cool down a little bit the environment, the area. So he went on that trip to Sidon, and Sidon, and you see the prayer here is very telling, was so-called a Gentile region, and was viewed by the Jews as a center of paganism and idolatry. And as this whole prayer is all about, the significance of the trip is to demonstrate that the teachings of Jesus, that the one and only God, that the Jews proclaim fake truth, that love and faith that we should have towards that Father and receive from that Father do not belong to one other group. That it's in its nature universal, and it's for the whole humanity. And it's not only for those who are already in the light, but it's specifically for those who are in darkness, specific for us, the blind, that I just read about. And this whole prayer is guiding towards the blind, is guided towards those who have not yet awakened, is guided towards we would call the receiver in the very first message that you read today, to transform those receivers into eventual senders themselves. So there is nothing really that I could highlight over here in this prayer, because again, it's a prayer, right? But when you read here, you see that he is asking for the unfortunate. He's asking for the blind. He's asking for the misguided. He's asking the Father to kindle his or her light, or its light, around those who have neglected God's blessings in darkness of earthly journey. The whole prayer is asking for help for those who have forgotten to share, or for those who are still selfish, for those who are still prideful, for those who, out of their pride and selfishness, they still have ashamed flaunt in their happiness in the face of poverty and misfortune, who shows off their power and wealth, instead of helping those seeks to show ostentation and pompery, putting vinegar on on the wound already, right? For those who understand that if they possess, it is because of divine providence that allowed them to have those things at that moment, and that they should be thankful for those things. To take pity on those who sleep in nightmares of vices, and so forth and so on, is a wonderful prayer that is guided. He didn't pray for those who are present over there, because we are all in that same boat, right? He didn't pray for be protected while he goes on that trip, while he and the disciples go on that trip. No, he asked for the less fortunate. The whole prayer is for the less fortunate. And the only thing that I think I marked over here, the renewer of life, I think it's such a nice definition of death, or concept of death. Extended paternal hands to all those who have forgotten about the sentence of death. What is death? The renewer of life. I think that's a very beautiful definition of what's death. If somebody asks me what is death, I'm not going to say it's the renewer of life. And of course, most of them don't understand what I'm talking about. But I think it's a very nice concept of death over here, the renewer of life. And at the end of the prayer, of course, everybody was shaken by it, even Jesus. But it reminds us of how we can live our lives forgetting that there is a supreme provider, a supreme creator of all things, that everything starts with that infinite love that provides to everyone in accordance to our needs, in accordance of capability of making use of those tools, like the rain, the swamp, and the dry land, and for the peach trees. Never forget. But even though the Supreme Lord, even being forgotten, even being neglected, even being denied in many cases, continue to provide. But even so, the love and righteous fathers of infinite goodness in perfect justice would continue to watch over them, does not abandon the swamp, does not abandon the criminal, does not abandon the dry land, does not abandon the imperfect, does not abandon those who reject, who has succumbed towards it, provides to all, and allow for each one of us to have the determination, the courage, the faith, the discipline to follow the example of the young man, to take those guidelines, not only believe in it, but put it to work. And putting it to work does not mean that we are being challenge free, but that we have the strength, the desire to overcome all the challenges to reach our destination, that to live in a state of perfect peace with our own consciences, which is the most happiness that we can achieve, at least at the level that we live today. Very appropriate end for the book. We're gonna have to see what to do with them for the following month. Hopefully something as good as this one. Any questions, any comment?
Can you go to the last page again with when you have all the names?
Sure.
Marta Antunes Moura discarnated this week. She was one of the directors of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, and she is responsible for a lot of the studies and the works that the United States Spiritist, the Brazilian Spiritist Federation produced in terms of the gospel, in terms of study groups, etc. So we just want to mention, as we had some other discarnations this beginning of the year, Janet Duncan and what's his name? He was with us at SGNY, Divaldo's friend from São Paulo, Miguel Sardan, also, also discarnated beginning of this year. So we have some good workers returning to the spiritual world.
Yeah, we have big shoes, so
Yeah.
All right. Any more comments, anyone? Okay, thank you all. You have anything to say, John?
Next Sunday, we are going to study the Medium's book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only announcement.
All right. So, Carol, can you give us the final prayer, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much, Elmo, for hosting today. Very enlightening. Thank you, John, as well. And thank you, Sarita, for reading for us today, and everyone who is here and who is participating. Infinite Creator and Divine Providence, we give thanks to be together again for our studies of the book, Jesus in the Home, chapter 48, 49, and 50. The Common Good, the Redemptive Journey, and in prayer. May we generously share the sublime teachings for the common good by expressing the ideas with heart and discernment. The givers are proactive, but do so without expectation or rewards. We hope that the seeds distributed will eventually provide understanding, inspiration, and a foundation of the gospel teachings. Apply useful assistance with faith, discipline, and desire to overcome obstacles to the light, as imposed by our mental challenges and unawareness. We must press on to move forward, making use of every opportunity and arising resources. Work for peace, happiness, and the renewal of life for the common good of all. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for guiding and inspiring us today. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us and for our loved ones, our teachers, our directors, our counselors, our mediums, our workers, and all our participants. We pray for inner peace and especially now for world peace and for those who are suffering in the physical and spiritual worlds. We pray for our center, SGNY, and all Spiritus centers throughout the world that they may grow, prosper, expand, and be protected throughout the day and throughout the night. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to our family, friends, loved ones, and co-workers. And may we remind ourselves as we go forth now to be beacons of love, of light, of peace, of service, and charity, which is love in action. May peace and love prevail. So be it.